All right, Alexander, let's talk about the Biden pardon. Biden pardoned Biden. Joe Biden pardoned Hunter Biden. And the interesting part about this pardon is that it covers a 10, 11-year period, and it starts at 2014. What happened on the year of 2014? What was going on in 2014 for this pardon to cover all of this time? Anyway, it's a very. I was reading a lot of analysis, legal analysis, and they say this is a very extensive pardon. A lot of the analysts, even on Politico, which is very pro-Biden, they even said they have not seen a pardon like this in generations. I think they said in generations they have not seen a pardon like this. Anyway, what are your thoughts on the Biden pardon of Biden?
Well, to answer your question, what happened in 2014? What happened in 2014 is that there was a change of government in Ukraine. That is the event that is clearly the starting point. I say a change of government, but of course that's a euphemism. We had the Maidan coup. President Yanukovych was violently overthrown. A new government loyal to the United States took over. Vice President Biden, as he then was already Obama's point man dealing with Ukrainian issues. He then visited Ukraine several times, as I very well remember, in the spring of 2014. He chaired a cabinet meeting in Kiev. If you search around, you might even still find the photographs of him chairing the cabinet meeting. A war began at around that time in the Donbass, and a certain youngish man who was related to Joe Biden, who was in fact his son, suddenly started to get all sorts of very interesting contracts with with one particular company, Burisma Limited, as you, by the way, extensively documented both at the time and later. It got remarkably little attention at the time, but a few people were writing about it, and you were one. At that particular time, a youngish man, as I said, landed a lovely job on Burisma's board, doing, well, just never been quite clear what exactly he was doing precisely.
Energy expert.
Politico,
just to read you the title, Alexander, so you can go off on this. Yeah. Politico, we haven't seen a pardon as sweeping as Hunter Biden's in generations. That's the title from Politico.
Exactly. Well, there you go. So a huge, expansive pardon extending all the way back to 2014, covering the whole Burisma affair. I mean, I think that's the first point to say. I mean, that is what this covers. It also covers all kinds of other things, many things which have not been investigated, or at least not properly investigated, let alone reported. And certainly not so far charged. As of this moment in time, he has been charged and convicted of just two offences that I'm aware of. One is on the tax issues, the other is on gun possession. So it's clear that this pardon goes far beyond those things. And as Professor Jonathan Turley of George Washington University, amongst many others, Robert Barnes, yourself, myself, the people of the grey zone, all sorts of other people have been pointing out for a great length of time. Hunter's activities, the ones that are really interesting, the activities that involve his commercial dealings, specifically in Ukraine, but also in China as well, well, they extend to someone else. And that somebody else is the person who's referred to in various emails as the big guy. And that big guy is, of course, the man who was at that time vice president of the United States, and who is now, as of the time making this program, still the president of the United States. So I'm going to make a suggestion. Not only has the president, Joe Biden, pardoned his son, granting him an incredibly sweeping pardon, but he has in effect pardoned himself, because it's very difficult, in fact it's impossible to see how any conceivable legal action could be brought against him personally for things which he perhaps has done or perhaps not. We've had no, as I said, proper investigation of these things, but about which a significant amount of evidence exists: email evidence, documentary evidence, witness evidence, all of that exists.
Laptop evidence.
Absolutely. All that evidence exists. It's very difficult to see how those cases could be brought, given that the person who acted as Joe Biden's agent or purported agent, and be very careful in my use of words, as I always am, Hunter Biden cannot be prosecuted for these things anymore. So, as I said, to me, Hunter has been pardoned, and in effect, the president has also pardoned himself.
Does this mean that all of the things that went down in 2014, starting with the coup in Ukraine, that all of this now is just going to be forgotten, that this can't be investigated, or it will not be investigated because you can't really get to an end point now, given this pardon?
I think that's clearly the intention. Of course, it can be investigated. You can still do research. You can still do investigation. What you cannot
but
do.
To what effect? That's my question to you. Like,
okay.
What could it? Why would someone go through with this? Yeah,
this is interesting because the Democrats themselves in 2021 created the precedent of impeaching a president after he left office. And it is not impossible. I mean, it is theoretically possible that if you could accumulate enough evidence, or enough evidence of what actually happened, you could argue that the actions of the president himself, when he was vice president, holding elected office, and the president himself in granting this pardon, were impeachable offenses. Now, I'm not saying that will ever be brought, and of course there's always the problem that you need a 2/3 majority in the Senate in order to impeach, but in theory, it could be done. It'd be very embarrassing for Joe Biden. I'm not saying that the Republicans, the Donald Trump and his team are going to go there, but if you are asking me, is there a theoretical endpoint? There is, given that very bad precedent was created back in 2021, and it's a precedent that can now be used against Biden.
Right, but there's no legal endpoint now. I mean,
I can't really see one. Again, one could in theory argue that if Joe Biden was the mastermind, he was the ultimate criminal. Well, he hasn't been pardoned. Only the son was. So the son can't be prosecuted, but that doesn't mean that you can't bring a prosecution against the father. But I think it'd be a very complicated thing to do, because bear in mind, without bringing a case against the son, especially if the son now refuses to give evidence, which he's bound to do, it's very difficult to construct a case that involves the father. So I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's extremely difficult. And personally, I wouldn't expect it.
Yeah, to get to the father, you have to go through the son.
Through the son.
What does this mean for Ukraine? Does this signal anything for Project Ukraine? Could this perhaps signal that the Biden family is 100% out of Project Ukraine, fully
Yes.
out?
Yes, they're not going to go back there. I mean, they're not. I mean, bear in mind. I mean,
So they've done their 10 years.
They've done their 10 years. They're not really going back there again. I mean, that is absolutely clear to me. So it is the beginning of the end of the Biden family. And I'm going to suggest the Democrats' involvement in Ukraine. I mean, I think this period of officials And the sons and daughters and former officials of the Democratic Party going off to Ukraine, making heaps of money there, doing all kinds of things. I think that's ended. I think that period in Ukrainian history is now, and American history, is now ended.
So the purpose of Biden, the son, being on the board of Burisma, at least in our analysis, and I think we've got this pretty much right, it was to provide Krisha.
Correct.
Protection, cover
Correct.
for the various oligarchs that were fighting it out in Ukraine at the time. What does this say about what would you say this means for the oligarchs that are still in Ukraine, that are still fighting for power? The Poroshenkos, Kolomoisky is still floating around. You could say that he's also around there, but all of these oligarchs that are in power in Ukraine, including Zelensky. I guess you could say Zelensky is an oligarch.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's definitely amassed enough money to be considered an oligarch. But what does this mean for all of them now? Is the protection, the Krisha, that was in Ukraine for 10 years is now officially, you could say it's officially done.
Yes.
Is there a new protection, a new Krisha that they're looking at? Is this going to come from different sources, from the UK, from the EU, or are they going to be left to the fate of Russia?
Well, and straightforwardly, they could look for external Krisha, just to say clearly, is protection. It's the roof. It means roof, but it's the Russian word, criminal argot, if you like, in Russia, for protection. It's the protection that a patron provides to his clients in order to ensure that they're not prosecuted or investigated. Anybody who tries to do that knows that there's somebody very, very powerful up there who can block that and who can come take action against the investigators. So this is a very, very common practice. It was a very common practice in Russia. It started during the Soviet period. It swelled to a huge scale. I say Russia, also Ukraine, obviously. It started during the Soviet period. It swelled to vast dimensions in the 1990s and continued into the early 2000s. In Russia itself, it still exists, but on a much, much smaller scale. In Ukraine, it exists still on a huge scale. And the party that the most powerful political force in Ukrainian politics was the United States. So the people who were in a best positioned to provide Krisha were people who were connected in various ways to the US government. And it was the point about Krisha is that protection is provided in return for favors. So these could be financial, or they could be acts of political loyalty, or all sorts of things. It's a way of binding an elite together, very common in Soviet and post-Soviet societies. So without the United States, the main party extending Krisha has quit the scene. Now, there are still alternative groups in Ukraine external parties that might do that. There's the EU, there's Germany, there's Britain. They're not going to be an adequate substitute for the United States. So I think that the oligarchs in Ukraine understand perfectly well that the Russians have absolutely no time for them. Putin, one of the major things that he did as leader of Russia was that he broke the power of the oligarchs. He's certainly not somebody who's going to want to give Krisha to Ukrainian oligarchs who he despises and has spoken about in the most scathing terms. He said things about Kolomoisky publicly, which, are barely printable. So he's not going to provide Krisha to the Ukrainians. They will therefore try and, for a short time, look around to give Krisha to each other. But what we will probably see, is an intensification of internal political struggles between the oligarchs within the Ukraine itself, but more and more of the oligarchs are going to start to bail out. Because without the United States, with the signal that the United States is quitting the scene, which is how they will see this, they will come to the conclusion that Ukraine itself is no longer safe for them.
Yeah, final question. What does this say about Biden and his latest moves connected to the conflict in Ukraine? So we get this pardon,
Yeah.
and a lot of it, if not most of it, is about Ukraine, or it definitely starts from Ukraine in 2014. But you also have, in his last 2 months as president, you have the long-range missile strikes into Russian territory. You have another, I believe he's given another 20 billion, or he's trying to give another 20 billion to Ukraine. He's trying to get as many weapons, 8 billion in weapons to Ukraine. And of course, you have the 300 billion in frozen assets, or whatever that amount is, which is sitting in Euroclear. Putting all of this stuff together, given it's the last 2 months, month and a half of Biden's presidency, everyone around Biden, when I say Biden, I always mean Biden and everyone around Biden. What do you think this says? Does this add anything to say the long range missile strikes that he greenlit? Does this signal something about peacekeepers in Ukraine, that Boris Johnson was talking about peacekeepers? You know what I mean with that word? Taurus missiles. I mean, how do you view this in the big picture of things with the last couple of months in Biden's presidency?
I think it explains them. I mean, by the way, they're talking about they got 50 days. What they're doing, or the way it looks to me at the moment, is that they're closing the books. They are doing everything they possibly can to make sure that all the positions are closed, which is why we're getting all the money being sent to Ukraine. $6 billion, apparently, over the next 50 days will be transferred to Ukraine. There is said to be, though it's not been publicly confirmed, a request made to Congress privately for another $24 billion on top of that.
You have the 50 billion loan as well,
There's the 50
I believe,
billion
which is
loan,
always being discussed here.
All of that's being rushed through to try to get it to Ukraine as quickly as they possibly can. And of course, there's the missile strikes, which now starting to look, I have to say, increasingly like some kind of payoff to the Ukrainians as well. Basically to buy silence and to do everything you possibly can to close the books before the Biden administration quits the scene, to close the books on a project that has clearly failed and that they're now all walking away from. I think that this event, by the way, strengthens my belief that all this talk about negotiations isn't in the end going to lead anywhere, and that people in the Biden administration are basically now preparing for a fall of Saigon scenario sometime in the next year or so, hopefully after the books have been closed and after they've left the scene.
You said a payoff for the long-range missile strikes into Russia.
Yeah, it's a payoff to the Ukrainians. In other words, what you're basically doing is you say, look, Biden is still president. We don't want you to bring up this whole topic, all these various topics of all of these things that's been going on in Ukraine. So we're going to give you some missiles. We're going to help you to do these strikes against Russia. We're going to provide you with all the money and all the weapons that we possibly can, in return for which we want your continued silence, both now and in the future. So that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah. All right. I guess we're never going to really get to the bottom of everything that happened in
No,
Ukraine.
I wouldn't be that pessimistic. We will probably find out an awful lot, but it may very well come. And this has to be faced. It may very well come in academic literature, historians and people like that writing about these things. It's not the first time. I remember some years ago reading about, there was a massive scandal in 18th century Britain called the South Sea Bubble. And it was widely suspected that the king and various other members of the royal family had been involved in it. It was a financial scandal. And the person who had, the fraudster at the heart of the scandal, fled to Vienna. And there were suggestions that, in fact, the British, even though they were trying to get him back, weren't really trying to get him back. Well, recently, 300 years after the event, somebody, a historian, went and found the documentation in the archives in Vienna that, in fact, even as the British were asking the Austrians to return this man to Britain, they were also contacting the Austrians and telling them, please, please keep him, leave him where he is. So I'm not saying it'll take 300 years, but it'll probably take a fair amount of time. We might all be dead and gone, but I think the truth will one day be told. But we might not be the people who see it.
All right. Well, who knows? Maybe we could put together a show from the great beyond. I don't know. All right. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and X. Go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch like what we are wearing in this video update. I have a link for the Duran shop in the description box down below. We also have a big sale on the Reverse Gear shop as well. I believe 25% off all merch from Reverse Gear shop. I'll put that link down below as well. Take care.